Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV and it's time for an ATSC 3.0 update. In case you're just tuning in, we have been following the progress of the next generation television standard here in the United States. And one issue that we keep talking about is the fact that the broadcasters want to encrypt the over-the-air TV signals, which is making it more difficult for people to watch free over-the-air television. And one of the things I've been talking about over the last couple of months is that the election of 2024 will have consequences for what happens with that encryption and the rollout of this new standard. And now the election is over. We're not going to relitigate any part of it, but we're going to talk about what the impact now of the election will be on the rollout of the standard and what it means for the DRM issue. Let's get to it. Now, before we dive into today's topic, I do want to let you know that today's show is being brought to you by all of you. That includes everyone who watches and subscribes to this channel, but also those of you who contribute to the channel on a regular basis, either through my donor box page at Lon.TV/support or through Patreon, the YouTube membership program, or Floatplane. We also now have some really cool merchandise here that you can pick up as well, including this great coffee mug and a bunch of other stuff too. And I want to thank you all for your continued support of the channel. I think we have made a big impact here, at least getting this story out there, especially to the regulators. But the regulators are about to change, and I don't know how well we're going to fare here rolling forward. But let's take a look at what the broadcasters are thinking about vis-a-vis the election. So the other day, Nexstar, who owns a number of TV stations throughout the United States, had one of their investor update calls, and they were very bullish on the Trump win. They feel as though it's going to be good for broadcasters, primarily because they see a lot of regulations perhaps getting rolled back. The biggest one right now, according to the CEO of Nexstar, is the ownership rules that the FCC has in place. So right now, you can't own a certain number of TV stations nationwide. Now, there are also local restrictions on a market-by-market basis that prevent broadcasters from owning too much of the broadcast space in one particular geographical area. They'd like to see that rolled back as well. And I think it's probably about time that happens, just given the fact that, as they correctly assert here in their statement, that big tech has unfettered access to just about every screen in America, and they are not under the same restrictions that broadcasters are from an ownership standpoint. One odd thing about this statement, though, is that they see big tech as the enemy. However, they rely upon a Google technology for their encryption, and one could argue that Google is the biggest of the big tech companies, yet they would not have any encryption without Google. You need Google operating systems on set-top boxes to decrypt these signals. It's the only technology that's compatible right now. And of course, Google is running the encryption standard that they are using. And presumably the broadcasters are all paying for that right. So yeah, big tech is a competitor, but they're also relying on them to lock you out of your TV signals. Now, ATSC 3.0 is their second priority this year, so I think they're going to be focused more on the ownership side than they are on the rollout, but they do want to get this rollout moving and moving quickly because there are potential benefits for them to offer more programming over the signals given how much more efficient ATSC 3.0 is. So why don't we take a look and see how the election will impact the FCC, because although there are some things that might work well for broadcasters with the change in leadership here, there are some other things that may not go so well for them. So let's take a look at the current makeup of the Federal Communications Commission. Right now, there are 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans. This is typical for how the FCC is structured. The party of the president gets 3 seats and the minority gets 2. And the most recent appointment, though, was done in September of 2023. So from 2021 through September of 23, there were 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. So not much happened insofar as regulatory activity because they were deadlocked until the Senate finally appointed the final members. So the president will name somebody, but they have to be confirmed by the Senate. And you probably saw in the news this week that Trump is really pushing for recess appointments, which is allowed under the Constitution to accelerate this process and prevent any deadlocks in the Senate from holding up his agenda. But what happened here with the FCC was that Ana Gomez was tied up for quite a while before she got on, and this is why the FCC has been sprinting on a lot of their regulatory actions now, because they only had about a year and a half or so to do anything. Now, I want to point out one of the commissioners here, Brendan Carr, who is one of the Republican administrators. He was on during the Trump administration, was reappointed during the Biden administration, and he is the front runner right now to become the new chair of the Federal Communications Commission. Now, on his bio, he has a quote from Axios that calls him the FCC's 5G crusader. He pushed very hard to open up more spectrum to 5G data providers. And of course, during the Trump administration, we saw the opening up of C-band for cellular telephones. There was some controversy with the aviation community over that, but it was needed because the demand for wireless data has grown tremendously, and he feels the need to have the government be less restrictive in a regulatory sense, but be very helpful in creating more competitive markets. And that's been his basic philosophy on the FCC. If you go to his bio page here, you can see some of his speeches and statements, and in each one of those, he's very consistent about having less regulation and having more competitive marketplaces. Now, in looking through a number of his past statements related to ATSC 3.0 and television broadcasters in general, I don't think we're going to see the FCC taking action on encryption anytime soon, if ever. So let's take a look at a speech that he gave back in May of 2020. This was to the NAB, talking specifically about the future of ATSC 3.0. This was right when it started rolling out. He said, ultimately, it is critical that we identify and remove the overhang of unnecessary government regulations that would otherwise hold back the introduction and growth of new competitive offerings. We want the marketplace, not outdated rules, to determine whether new services will succeed. And he points to the fact that wireless providers were given a very similar mandate that the TV broadcasters have been given with ATSC 3, which is to have the industry develop the services here and let the market decide what's going to succeed or fail, as opposed to the government defining how everything should work. And one of the things, though, that I think broadcasters should be mindful of here is the fact that he didn't talk about television at all in this speech. In fact, what he sees ATSC 3 as is the potential for another data stream to Americans, something he calls broadcast internet. And he points to the fact that you've basically got a 25 megabit per second data stream to Americans that could do a lot more than just provide a television signal. He also went a bit further in that speech, implying that broadcasters should maybe consider pivoting their business model to this broadcast internet idea, because they could offer to rural America that's underserved high-speed downloads, or maybe higher speed downloads than they get currently over DSL or even dial-up. And that might make the internet business more competitive in rural communities if there was a lower cost option with better speeds and service. By the way, Carr was also very upset that the FCC took Starlink out of the rural broadband initiative, because it does provide very high speeds to just about any place in the United States. Carr also wrote a chapter in the Project 2025 document. This has certainly been a controversial piece in the campaign for other policy areas, but there's actually a whole chapter on what the FCC should do in that document that Brendan Carr authored. And here he continues what he's been saying in other places, where the FCC should promote freedom of speech, unleash economic opportunity, and ensure that every American has a fair shot at next-generation connectivity. And he also, in there, talks about how broadcasters should offer high-speed downloads directly to consumers over spectrum that previously provided only TV service. And then in June, he attended a meeting of the ATSC where all the broadcasters were present, and he raised the possibility of auctioning off the spectrum that the broadcasters are currently using for ATSC 1.0. Again, given how efficient 3.0 is, he thinks that spectrum might be better used elsewhere. I don't think that was very well received by the audience there. He did then come back and say it has to be a mutual understanding here. But clearly what he wants to see here is regulatory action to set a date for ATSC 3 and then let the market decide exactly what gets offered over that new standard. The bottom line here is that I don't think the encryption topic will be something that will be regulated. He's going to let the market figure that out. And of note at this meeting, I missed this back in June when it was posted on the article that I've linked to, but they actually had some data here about the rollout of converter boxes and TV sets. And things here are just not moving in the direction you would hope for the rollout of this standard. Again, we've had this standard now for a couple of years, and as of this moment, only about 13% of total TV shipments have an ATSC 3 tuner in them, and as we've talked about before, most of them are higher-end televisions. And given all the complexity that they've put into place with this DRM, it's making it a lot harder for manufacturers to put the new tuner in. They don't have to go through all the hoops for an ATSC 1.0 tuner that they do for a 3.0 tuner. And it could very well be that the market may just decide this DRM is too complicated. None of these tuners get put in televisions, and then that's the end of the story for broadcast television, and they all just pivot to data. Now, one other thing to take a look at on this chart here is what the industry anticipates for converter sales as we roll into 2028. They do anticipate 34 million TV sets being sold with ATSC 3 tuners on board. I am doubtful of that figure based on the way things are going. And they're anticipating, though, less than 1 million converter boxes being sold in that year, which is surprising to me because I think a lot of people are going to try to get a few more years out of the TV that they already own, especially given that TV will likely tune into all of the big tech streaming channels that they are now competing against. Meanwhile, they're making it really hard to get their own signals onto those screens that big tech has unfettered access to, in those words. And I think a lot of what's driving this problem is the DRM and how hard it is for innovative little startups to compete in the hardware business and perhaps provide a new outlet for broadcasters to reach people again. They're just shutting that market off completely with DRM. And ultimately, I think what's going to happen here is something we can pull out of this statement that Carr made at that same ATSC conference. What he said here is that what we see in technologies from a wireless approach is one that we should take here. And when he talks about wireless, he's talking about 5G. We largely trust the mobile wireless 5G industry to handle upgrades in technology, and you're getting the playbook here. So what he's saying is that if you want to encrypt your channels, go right ahead. We're not going to stop you. So I don't anticipate this new FCC taking any action on encryption, but the market will ultimately decide whether or not it's going to work. So this could very well end broadcast TV as we know it. The new, perhaps incoming chair of the FCC would love to see broadcasters pivot to an internet-based model where they're providing data and not TV broadcasts. And really at this point, the market will pay what the market can bear. And unfortunately for broadcasters, I think this will ultimately lead to them having to change their business model significantly. It might be going in that direction anyhow, but DRM is only going to accelerate it. For what it's worth, you might still want to submit some comments to the FCC. You can find instructions about how to do that at Lon.TV/FCC instructions. Again, I don't think the FCC is going to take any action now that we have the outcome of this election, but it might be good for the FCC to ponder the fact that DRM is limiting a market for tuning devices that could very well keep broadcasters afloat a little bit longer. But it looks like the market will ultimately be the deciding factor here. So I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comment section, and we will continue following this story. But again, I don't think we're going to see the end of DRM anytime soon. That'll do it for this one. Until next time, this is Lon Seidman. Thanks for watching.